August 7, 1942, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. As the sun rose over the Pacific, 11,000 American Marines landed on the shores in what became the first major Allied strike against Japan. Operation Watchtower marked a pivotal moment in the Pacific conflict. Beyond the ensuing naval clashes and jungle battles, an unexpected tool emerged within the island's shadowy perimeter, not forged from metal or explosives, but rooted in the structure of language itself. The challenge was urgent and lethal. In the chaos of dense tropical foliage, where visibility was only a few feet and the enemy sometimes spoke English or wore captured U.S. uniforms, how could sentries distinguish between Allied troops and Japanese operatives slipping through the lines under cover of darkness? The answer came from an unlikely place: the articulation of a single letter. Master Technical Sergeant James W. Herbert, a Marine Corps Reserve combat correspondent, arrived with the assault forces on August 7th. In an interview preserved in Naval Archives on March 10, 1943, Herbert recounted the security tactic that became standard during the campaign, offering the clearest primary evidence of pronunciation testing in the Pacific theater. "We always used passwords with the letter L," Herbert said, noting that L was difficult for Japanese speakers to pronounce because it does not exist in their language. This simple insight reflected a deep understanding of linguistic limits, which proved invaluable for American security throughout the operation. Herbert also highlighted a key limitation: the tests sometimes failed with English-educated Japanese soldiers, revealing that infiltrators had varying levels of English proficiency and that the measure, while effective, was not infallible. By 4 p.m. on August 8, Marines had seized the nearly finished Japanese airfield, originally called Lunga Airfield, later renamed Henderson Field in honor of Major Lofton R. Henderson, a Marine aviator killed at Midway. The airfield became operational with the arrival of the first PBY Catalina on August 12, and by August 20th, a permanent contingent of 31 aircraft had arrived. Control of Henderson Field became the focal point of a 6-month campaign, with repeated Japanese efforts to reclaim it. Guarding the airfield and surrounding perimeter became critical. Japanese forces, showing the tactical ingenuity and persistence typical of their operations, conducted numerous infiltration attempts, moving at night in small groups or individually to gather intelligence, sabotage, or mislead American troops. Darkness made detection extremely difficult. Marines at checkpoints had to make rapid decisions to identify whether approaching figures were allies or enemy infiltrators. Conventional methods failed in this environment. Papers could be stolen or forged, uniforms taken from casualties, appearances were hard to verify in low light, and even voices could deceive. As some Japanese soldiers spoke English with varying skill, the Marines needed a verification method that could not be easily faked, one revealing identity through traits the infiltrator could not consciously manipulate. The solution exploited the phonetic structure of Japanese. Understanding why this worked requires a look at the differences between Japanese and English sound systems. Japanese contains a single liquid sound, written as R in Hepburn romanization, which differs from both English R and L linguistically. This is classified as an alveolar tap, produced by quickly tapping the tongue against the ridge behind the upper front teeth. English, by contrast, has two distinct liquids: L, a lateral approximate with the tongue touching the ridge and air flowing around the sides, and R, a postalveolar approximate with the tongue pulled back. These English sounds occupy separate phonetic spaces easily distinguished by native speakers, but for Japanese speakers, they fall within a single category. This difference is not due to physical inability or hearing problems. Japanese speakers can produce both sounds and hear the differences in isolation. The difficulty is perceptual. Their brains categorize both R and L as the same Japanese liquid based on early language acquisition. Research from World War II onward confirmed this. Studies by Guto, 1971, Miwaki et al., 1975, and Takagi and Mann, 1995 showed that Japanese speakers, even after long exposure to English, struggled to distinguish R and L. Takagi and Mann found that Japanese residents in the U.S. for over 12 years still had significant difficulty compared to native English speakers. The Milwaukee study revealed that when acoustic cues were altered to make R and L less speech-like, Japanese speakers could distinguish them as well as native speakers, showing the challenge was in linguistic processing, not hearing. For military security, this meant Japanese soldiers attempting infiltration faced a nearly insurmountable barrier. Even those fluent in English and familiar with vocabulary and grammar would reveal themselves through mispronunciation of words containing L*, the way words were pronounced was beyond conscious control. When under pressure, exhaustion, or time constraints, an individual's native pronunciation habits would surface automatically, regardless of preparation or intent. This method relied on how humans learn language in early childhood, when the brain forms perceptual categories for native sounds that remain stable throughout life and resist change even with extensive training in adulthood. The Marines applied this principle using challenge words that contained multiple L sounds. According to Herbert's testimony and surviving records, passwords deliberately included the letter L, because Japanese speakers would have difficulty pronouncing it correctly. When a sentry issued a password containing L sounds, a native English speaker would articulate it naturally, whereas a Japanese speaker, even one fluent in English, would usually substitute a sound closer to the Japanese R, producing something that sounded clearly wrong to a trained ear. One particular word has entered the historical record, though only from a single source. Oliver Garling, an Associated Press journalist, wrote in his 1942 book that Japanese soldiers sometimes approached checkpoints pretending to be American or Filipino troops. He described sentries using a test word like La Palua, and if the first two syllables came back incorrectly, the sentry would open fire without waiting for the rest. If this word was actually used, it was ideally suited for the purpose. It contains multiple L sounds in quick succession, making it extremely difficult for a Japanese speaker to pronounce correctly without extensive training. Focusing on the first two syllables also made tactical sense, allowing sentries to detect mispronunciation quickly and minimize exposure. However, it is important to note the evidence. Garling's book is the only known source that mentions La Palua, while it is contemporary to the events, and Garling was a reputable journalist with military access. No independent confirmation appears in Marine Corps after-action reports, operational histories, or participant memoirs. Diaries and memoirs from that period, including Richard Trigascus' Guadalcanal diary and Robert Leckie's Helmet for My Pillow, make no reference to the word. What can be stated with certainty is that L-based passwords were regularly used. As Herbert testified, whether La Palua was among them is plausible but unproven, though it fits the documented tactical approach in contemporary accounts. The campaign lasted 6 months, from August 7, 1942, to February 9, 1943, when Japanese forces finally evacuated. During that time, Marines and reinforcing Army units faced constant Japanese attempts to retake Henderson Field. Major engagements included the Battle of the Tenaru on August 21, the Battle of Edson's Ridge from September 12 to 14, and the Battle for Henderson Field from October 23 to 26. Throughout these battles, and the lulls in between, perimeter security remained critical. Japanese infiltration techniques were operatives often moved alone or in small groups at night, employing camouflage that incorporated jungle vegetation, moving with remarkable stealth through terrain they had carefully studied, and sometimes speaking English to impersonate American personnel. The threat was continuous. Herbert also noted that grammatical precision could reveal infiltrators. One sentry fired on an individual because he used language far too formal for an ordinary Marine, saying, "Hold your fire. We are American Marines, and wish to report our evening's activities." In this context, pronunciation testing offered a fast, reliable method of identifying enemy personnel without relying on sight, documentation, or extended dialogue. A simple challenge with an L-heavy word could expose an infiltrator in seconds because it targeted automatic pronunciation patterns established in early childhood. The concept of using language to identify outsiders has historical precedent. The term shibboleth comes from the Hebrew Bible, where the Gileadites identified Ephraimites by their inability to pronounce it correctly. Similar linguistic tests have appeared throughout military history, whenever forces needed to distinguish friend from foe. In the European theater, the D-Day invasion used the words flash, thunder, and welcome for identification, exploiting sounds that native German speakers found difficult. Linguistic differences, such as English, L-R contrasts, the V sound, TH sounds, and the broader vowel system provided reliable markers. While many of these features could be used for security, the L-R distinction appears to have been the most widely applied in the Pacific. According to available testimony, this approach highlights the broader role of language-based measures in maintaining operational security. Throughout the Pacific Campaign, American troops constantly faced the threat of infiltration, deception, and the difficulty of identifying friend from foe when visual recognition was unreliable. The use of challenge and password systems, common in militaries worldwide, became especially vital in this theater due to unique conditions. The dense jungle terrain drastically limited visibility. Heavy rainfall and frequent night operations by Japanese forces forced sentries to rely primarily on sound and verbal interaction to identify approaching figures. Japanese military tactics emphasized infiltration, nighttime maneuvers, and attacks designed to sow confusion, making reliable verification essential. The principle of a challenge and password is straightforward. A sentry issues a word. The individual must respond with the correct password, and failure to do so triggers an immediate response. Its effectiveness depends on regularly changing passwords, securely distributing them to allied forces while keeping them from enemies, and ideally choosing words that are difficult for the opposition to pronounce correctly. The Military Intelligence Service, Language School, provides an interesting counterpoint to the pronunciation testing narrative. Established in November 1941 at the Presidio of San Francisco, the school relocated to Camp Savage, Minnesota. In June 1942, following the internment of Japanese Americans from the West Coast, and later to Fort Snelling in August 1944, operating until June 1946, over second generation, Japanese Americans trained there as translators, interpreters, and intelligence specialists, serving across the Pacific to support interrogations, document translation, and intelligence operations. Their contributions were vital. They interrogated prisoners, translated captured materials, intercepted radio communications, and offered cultural insights that helped commanders anticipate Japanese strategies, all while many had family members confined in internment camps. For pronunciation testing, these soldiers would have passed L-based challenges effortlessly, speaking English with native fluency. Their presence underscored that Japanese ethnicity alone did not indicate enemy status. Private First Class Eugene B. Sledge, who served in the Pacific with K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, 1st Marine Division, later chronicled his experiences in with the Old Breed at Peleliu and Okinawa, a widely respected first-hand account of infantry combat. While Sledge did not participate in the Guadalcanal campaign, arriving there in 1944 for training, his memoir highlights the harsh realities of combat and the psychological strain on Marines. Though it does not reference pronunciation testing, the scarcity of mentions of L-based passwords in combat memoirs suggests that while the practice existed, as Herbert confirmed, it may have been routine or limited, rather than elaborate, with effective security procedures often becoming invisible to those employing them. Allied victory came at heavy cost. Roughly 7,100 Americans were killed and over 8,000 wounded, while Japanese losses were estimated at 31,000, many due to disease and starvation as American forces disrupted their supply lines. The Japanese evacuation in February 1943 saved about 10,000 troops, but the strategic loss was clear. Japan lost the initiative in the Pacific permanently. The limitations of pronunciation testing must be acknowledged. Herbert noted that English-educated Japanese could sometimes bypass L-based challenges, and Japanese intelligence occasionally used such individuals for operations. In the chaos of battle, with artillery, explosions, and shouting, subtle pronunciation differences could be hard to detect reliably. The method also risked false positives because American forces included personnel from diverse backgrounds: Filipino scouts, Chinese Americans, and others whose accents or non-standard English could affect pronunciation. Filipino speakers, for example, had little trouble with L and R sounds due to the phonology of Tagalog and other languages, though their English might differ in other ways. Despite these challenges, AL-based pronunciation testing provided an elegant solution to a genuine security problem. It leveraged inherent phonological differences, required no special equipment, could be administered rapidly, and offered a practical means of identification when other methods were unreliable. Its effectiveness lay in accessing something fundamental about language acquisition. Phonetic patterns formed in early childhood remain remarkably stable throughout life and resist modification. Even with training and effort, the story of pronunciation testing illustrates both a clever military innovation and the enduring influence of early linguistic development. For historians, this episode sheds light on the practical aspects of security operations in the Pacific War. For linguists, it demonstrates how knowledge of phonology can have real-world applications. For general audiences, it offers a striking example of language being used as a tactical tool in warfare. Most importantly, it emphasizes the need to separate verified facts from later exaggerations. The established core of the story is clear. American forces at Guadalcanal used passwords containing L sounds to detect Japanese infiltrators, who struggled to pronounce these sounds correctly. This procedure is documented by participants, aligns logically with the phonological differences between Japanese and English, and represents a pragmatic innovation in response to immediate security challenges. The word Lalua appears in a single contemporary source and fits the pattern, though additional verification would strengthen the account. Beyond this, many popular retellings have added unverifiable details, invented statistics, or suggested a coordinated Pacific-wide program for which no evidence exists. Such embellishments, while dramatic, distort the historical record and exaggerate the scale of pronunciation testing. Even without embellishment, the verified history is remarkable, showing American forces adapting to jungle warfare, exploiting linguistic differences to maintain security, and innovating tactically to address pressing threats. It reflects the value of careful observation, practical intelligence, and the willingness to experiment with new methods. It also provides a glimpse into the daily realities of Pacific combat, where security, identification, and constant infiltration threats posed ongoing challenges. The Marines who developed and applied pronunciation testing deserve recognition for their ingenuity. In the broader context of the campaign, the contributions of Japanese-American linguists were also vital. Many served while their families remained in internment camps, demonstrating loyalty, professionalism, and essential support for intelligence operations. The historical record confirms that American Marines at Guadalcanal systematically employed L-based passwords to identify Japanese infiltrators. As testified by combat correspondent James Herbert, the word Lalua appears in a credible 1942 source as an example of such passwords. While there is no evidence of a systematic Pacific-wide program, the practice at Guadalcanal reflects tactical innovation, addressing real security problems. Lessons learned are informed later, operations across the Pacific, improving tactics, logistics, and coordination. Amphibious assaults from Tarawa through the Marianas, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa built on experiences gained at Guadalcanal. While direct evidence of pronunciation testing at later battles is lacking, the principle of leveraging language differences remains sound. The scientific explanation for why pronunciation testing worked, based on phonology and language acquisition, was established after the war. But Marines did not need this theoretical understanding. They observed that Japanese speakers struggled with English L sounds and applied that knowledge effectively. This represents practical knowledge, observations drawn from experience and used to solve immediate problems. The implications extend beyond military history, showing how language features can serve as reliable identifiers in security contexts. During the Vietnam War, similar principles were applied with different linguistic contrasts, and in modern conflicts, linguistic analysis has grown more sophisticated, incorporating voice, stress, and dialect recognition. Ethically, pronunciation testing was relatively benign. It did not harm those who passed, and those who failed were identified objectively through phonetic evidence rather than arbitrary discrimination. Unlike violent or coercive measures, it complied with the laws of war and the Geneva Conventions. The testing also highlighted the distinction between language and ethnicity. Japanese Americans serving in the Pacific, including those in the Military Intelligence Service, automatically passed L-based tests because their linguistic background was American, regardless of ethnicity. Pronunciation testing therefore measured language ability rather than racial or ethnic identity, exploiting the correlation between Japanese citizenship and Japanese language fluency to detect infiltrators. This distinction, though not explicitly articulated at the time, carries broader significance for understanding the relationship between language, identity, and security. The human dimension of the Guadalcanal campaign extends beyond tactics. Both American and Japanese soldiers demonstrated courage, resilience, and adaptability in one of the most challenging campaigns of the war. The Marines who created and implemented pronunciation testing merit recognition for their resourcefulness, while the Japanese soldiers facing these measures were skilled, determined fighters contending with harsh conditions, long supply lines, and combat thousands of miles from home. Postwar research into the phonetic principles that made pronunciation testing effective has deepened our understanding of how humans learn and process language. Linguists and cognitive scientists, many of whom had wartime experience in military intelligence, conducted extensive studies on second language, pronunciation, acquisition. Research by scholars like Patricia Cull showed that infants are born capable of distinguishing phonetic contrasts from any language, but this universal ability narrows within the first year as the brain specializes in the sound categories of the native language. This neural commitment, while essential for efficient communication, created exactly the kind of limitation that made pronunciation testing valuable during the war. Adult Japanese speakers learning English L and R sounds were not simply practicing new they were attempting to reconfigure neural patterns formed decades earlier, a task that cognitive science has shown is extremely difficult and often impossible to achieve fully. The use of pronunciation testing during World War II also influenced the study of foreign accent. Before the war, accented speech was often seen as incorrect pronunciation correctable through training. But post-war research revealed that accents reflect deeper structural differences in phonetic processing, not simple errors. This understanding led to improved language instruction methods and recognition that adult learners almost always retain features of their native accent. For military purposes, this meant pronunciation testing remained a viable identification tool for conflicts, where language differences could be exploited. The principle has been applied in various ways in later conflicts, with modern technology introducing tools like voice stress analysis and linguistic profiling that go beyond simple pronunciation checks. The example of Technical Sergeant Paul Yamamoto, though his name cannot be independently verified, represents the thousands of Japanese Americans who served faithfully despite the internment of their families. These soldiers, raised speaking English, showed that linguistic identity could transcend ethnicity, while Japanese infiltrators revealed through non-native pronunciation that language background, not ethnicity, determined the effectiveness of the test. In the summer of 1945, preparations for what many expected to be the final, bloodiest phase of the Pacific War were underway. An invasion of the Japanese home islands would have presented an environment where infiltration would have been even more difficult to detect. with enemy forces blending into civilian populations, using local resources, and accessing civilian clothing. Plans called for layered security measures combining pronunciation, testing, documentation checks, physical identification, and restricted movement zones, anticipating that some individuals with English proficiency might still attempt infiltration. These plans were never fully enacted due to Japan's surrender after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they represented the culmination of years of linguistic security development. In the post-war period, declassified documents offered historians insights into security measures in the Pacific. Although records on pronunciation testing remain limited, mainly to Herbert's testimony and the Gramling reference, the story highlights how military success often relies on numerous small innovations, created by personnel addressing immediate problems with practical solutions. The use of L-based passwords at Guadalcanal, while perhaps less elaborate than some accounts suggest, was a genuine innovation that solved a real security challenge. Today, pronunciation testing at Guadalcanal remains a small but meaningful chapter in the Pacific War, demonstrating how language can influence tactics, provide operational advantages, and show that success often comes from combining strategic planning with numerous small, practical measures devised by soldiers in the field. The historical record, when examined carefully, confirms both the achievements and limitations of pronunciation testing. It worked at Guadalcanal, giving sentries a quick, reliable way to identify potential infiltrators. It leveraged real differences in Japanese and English phonology, but was not a perfect system, a comprehensive Pacific-wide program, or the elaborate operation described in some popular narratives. Understanding the evidence and its limits honors the memory of those who served while maintaining historical accuracy. The Marines at Guadalcanal faced extraordinary challenges during one of the first major American offensives in the Pacific, and their development of practical security measures like pronunciation testing, alongside their courage and determination in defending Henderson Field, contributed to a strategic victory that altered the course of the war. The verified essence of the story remains compelling. American forces exploited fundamental differences in how Japanese and English speakers perceive and produce liquid consonant sounds to create a security measure that was simple, effective, and hard to counterfeit. This application of linguistic knowledge, whether through observation or deliberate understanding, exemplified the tactical innovation that helped secure Allied success in the Pacific.